Welcome to Cablesfarm. This is the third of our Wogdon pistol recreation videos, and we're going to look at making the stock blanks this time. So I've actually cut 2 stock blanks with a router, which we'll see afterwards, and I have started to inlet the barrels. The first one I did on the manual milling machine, just got out the rough shape of the barrel groove and then did it with chisels, which is a very tedious and long-winded job. So I thought I would set up my little CNC milling machine and write a little bit of software to mill out the grooves. Well, that turned out to be quite an adventure, because every so often the mill would drop out, the motor would stall or something terrible would happen and it would all stop. So I had about 6 efforts at routing out the groove for the barrel. I'd already done a test on a scrap piece of wood, and this had come out fairly alright. So I was a bit frustrated, and then when I'd finished that, when I came to take it off the CNC milling machine and drop the barrel in it, I discovered that because of all the messing about, the register on the axes had occasionally gone astray, and it had cut a barrel groove that was too wide. So that didn't work. So that stock blank is a write-off. So I've now set up another stock blank in the jig, and I shall go out after I've done this and route that one out. So the first one, which I mostly did by hand, I've got here. I smoked the barrel. There'll be a bit of a video on that too, and I've inlet the false breech here in a preliminary way, so that's quite nice and smooth and in with the wood. When I'm routing them out, one of the advantages of doing it with the router is that you can actually shape the wood quite accurately, and so you don't need to leave a lot of wood to be hacked off by hand afterwards. So if I were doing it on a bandsaw, I'd probably have to leave quite a lot of wood to make sure I didn't cut into the bits I needed. But with this, I can get the shape of the stock quite carefully, and my template says that I got it quite good. So here's my template, and so I think I've got that. That's pretty good, pretty accurate. When you look at it, it's about 1 millimeter bigger than it needs to be, which is perfect. So we're going to have a look at that. And before we go off into the workshop, I'm going to show you, I've spent a couple of days, I got depressed when I wrecked the stock blank, and so I spent a couple of days reorganizing the workshop, which is what one does when one gets frustrated with what one's doing. So I moved the benches around and cleared up quite a lot of rubbish, and so I thought I would show you what it was like now. Anyway. So the most important part of the workshop in the winter is the wood burning stove, which keeps it all reasonably habitable. Okay, we'll just have a quick scan around to see what there is else. So this is the sort of drawing bench where I do all the planning, which is quite a nice area to sit in. Got a view out of the window, not there's much to see, and then next to it is the engraving station with my microscope and the turntable there. So scanning round from there, there's a sink, a little sink there with running hot and cold water, which is handy. And scan around past the back door, and there's my hone for sharpening gravers, electric hone, which I got out of a skip. There's a grind wheel which isn't actually fixed down at the moment, and then in the foreground there's my heavy workbench, which has got the vices on it, and where the welding, I got my TIG welder set up, and also a gas torch for heating stuff up to red heat. So that's the heavy bench. The round thing in the foreground is an anvil. So moving round the other side of that bench is my sort of working bench for tidy working, and on the bench at the moment you can see I've set up the jig for routing out the second stock, the replacement stock for the Wogdon pistol. And going round further from that, we come to the nice Edwardian specimen cabinet, and on top of that I've got the CNC router, which at the moment is having a brain transplant because the power supply isn't good enough. So that's that, and then we're up back round to the door into the workshop there. So that's a 360-degree view of it. We're in the outside workshop now. We've got the jig set up. The profile of the stock is on here. It's cut 9mm smaller, or a little bit less than that, smaller than the outline that we require, because the guide bush, the router has a 30mm guide bush and a 1/2" cutter. So that's all set up. It's got packing pieces all around it, very carefully engineered to be the same thickness as the template, so that the router bed stays absolutely horizontal on here and cuts at right angles to this surface, because we don't want to find that we haven't got quite enough wood. So I'm going to cut this. The router is at the moment set for about 1/4 inch shaft protrusion, and so we're going to cut this all out using that. Just checking that you can see properly. My picture is upside down, so I can't tell very clearly. Right, so we started off at the back there. Around it. That's okay, good. We've taken the back edge off a little bit, so I'll just clear out the shavings from there. Should have a vacuum cleaner on it really. Right, now I'll put the cutter down another chunk. You don't seem to be having any problem cutting that. are, that should be all nicely routed now. There'll be a little bit left to shape out, but it should be fine. So there we are, there's about 3 mil left in there. They're all stuck together with double-sided sticky tape. So there we are. That looks good. So we can now make a mess of that one as well. Right, well, we've got our stock blanks now, and I'm just going to have a look with you at some of the issues that arise from this. So here's our cutout of the stock blank from the photograph. So if I overlay that on my stock blank, I have got a little bit of spare. I've got a bit of excess underneath the body underneath the lock, and I've got a little bit of excess under the end of the barrel. I've got to cut the barrel surface down at some point, so it's not bad. It's not bad. So let's, before we cut anything down, we need to really assess exactly what's going on. So here's the barrel. The barrel will be inlaid so that half of this flat is visible. There's where I reckon the end of the barrel should be. That is where I think the barrel should start from. So that gives us a sort of pretty good barrel position there. The first thing to notice, if you can, is that my false breech, which isn't quite down on the barrel there, but is cocked up far too much. I looked through the book, and all the Wogdon pistols have a sort of quite rapid fall away at the breech, and this breech block, this false breech, is not falling away as fast as a proper Wogdon, as a Wogdon breech would fall away. It doesn't even quite match up to my Hutchinson. I mean, they fall away quite rapidly, and this one actually doesn't. So we've got to work. We'll have to remake. We'll have to heat up and bend the false breech. So that positioning of the barrel in there defines the touch hole. So that's basically the first. That's the first issue, is the touch hole. Having got the touch hole, you've then got your lock with your pan, and of course the touch hole is exactly in the middle of the pan and slightly above, a millimetre or so above the surface of the pan. So therefore you can define the position of the lock quite accurately. And then from the drawings you can get a rough guide to what angle, well, in fact an accurate guide to what angle the lock should be at. That enables you to fix the back corner of the lock, which enables you to fix the sear arm, which is the thing that connects, that's the bit that connects the mechanism to the set trigger mechanism. So that will sit under there and press up on there. So having done that, you can then, I'll set that just so it's out of the way. There we are. So having fixed the position of the sear, we can now fix the position of the trigger, the set trigger mechanism, which will be about on that on the bottom surface. Now the bottom surface here is actually about 2 to 3 millimeters lower than my paper would indicate that it should be. So I may need that extra depth in order to get this set trigger in. And so if I now put my trigger guard, which I bent up out of lead, in there, you can see that fits quite well. It's about the right place in relation to the trigger. It ends, it's a bit long, I've made it a bit long here, I'm not quite sure why that is. It's a little bit long, but it'll do. So there's that. So that's the one sort of issue. So we've then got to mill in the trigger, the barrel. We've got to cut off the end of the stock, which we might leave a little bit excess. We've got to mill out the barrel grooves. We've got to mill out a groove for the ramrod, so that's got to be milled out, and that's got to be drilled. We'll assume that ramrod is about the right length, so that's got to be milled out pretty well back to there. So we'll mill out the bit that's exposed, and then I've got to put a drill in there to get that hole drilled right back to there. It's not a particularly big hole. I think it'll be something like 5 or 6 mil at the most. So that's drilling that out. So those, and then you can see I've marked on here those are the two pipe. Those are cut out slots for the pipes which we'll put in once we've drilled the ramrod. We'll run a ball-ended milling cutter down for the ramrod here, and then once we've got that to the right depth, well, first of all we'll cut out the barrel. The barrel's going to be slightly difficult to cut out because the barrel is quite markedly swamped on the underneath. That means that it's not a straight line. It's got, I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this, it's got really quite a strong wasting in the middle. So it's about 2 millimeters of wasting in the middle. So when we come to mill that, I mean, we're not going to be able to mill it exactly as it is on the barrel. So we're going to have to mill the breech just a little bit more than the middle, and then take it up by hand. So once we've got that in, then that'll be the defining thing, because once the barrel is fitted, and we'll fit it by hand, once the barrel is fitted, that defines exactly where the touch hole is, and once the touch hole is defined, that defines where the lock goes. Once the lock is defined, that defines where the set trigger is going to go. Once the set trigger is going to go, that defines where the trigger guard is going to go, and everything then kind of follows on from there. Once the barrel's in, we can see where we have to put the ramrod groove in here to give us a reasonable thickness. There's about, I think, typically between the bottom of the barrel and the ramrod, you've not got much more than about 3 millimeters. So that'll define where that ramrod groove goes along. And once we've milled out the groove with a ball end cutter in there, probably a 6 mil cutter, then we can get a rod, shape it into a drill, and run it down the groove that we've made and run it right back to wherever it's got to go to. Pretty well, I guess it's got to go to about there. So we've got to drill in to about there. And then we can do things like, well, we can start to inset the lock, which is quite a fiddly job. Horrible job actually, don't really like it. So we can inset the lock, we can cut the recess for the set trigger in there, and so forth. So and then we can start to we can then shape it, I think, at that point. But these things like milling the ramrod groove, cutting the barrel things, and starting to inset the lock are probably best done while it's in the square to start with. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing. First of all, we'll cut this line down to here so we don't have to mill off so much wood when we come to putting in the barrel, and then we'll do the barrel. We'll cut off the stock. We'll probably leave about 3 or 4 millimeters on the end to be shaped off at the end. So that's where we're going to be going today, and we'll have some more later. So that's all coming along quite nicely.